a third aspect that I would consider is a great impact of man on the lagoon system is around the edge of the lagoon are these fish farms, the Valley da Pesca, where they've actually dammed them off. They used to be part of the open lagoon, and the tide would come and go, and it was where large landowners had kind of natural fish farms. I can't find a good English term in all these years that I've been here to describe what it is, but basically it's in the natural areas on the edge of the lagoon where they keep the fish in kind of natural tanks. But it was at the beginning of the 1900s, I guess, when they decided to close them off to the natural tide so that they could keep the water warmer, keep the smaller fish in the farms, etc. And that's really reduced the total area for the tidal waters to expand within the lagoon system, especially combined with the land reclamation. So what does it mean? Because following the lagoon from a kind of environmental point of view, the politics are very intense and get overheated very quickly, and it's very difficult for anybody kind of interested in the terms of sustainable development to kind of get their head around what's really going on in Venice, because on the one hand the kind of human environment is very closely linked to the ups and downs of the natural environment. On the other hand, there's been very significant human changes to the natural environment. So engineers tend to say there's no kind of natural state of Venice, like if you're trying to restore, a game reserve, you know how it used to be and how it should be. But in Venice, because of these centuries of interaction between man and natural lagoon processes, it's very subtle changes in emphasis when deciding what to do about Venice. And in fact, that might be why nobody decides what to do about Venice. In London, there's people that are working on the long-term plans for the flood protection with the Thames barrier system. They haven't only planned the next generation of Thames barrier, but also they're thinking of what they need to do in the year 2100. In Venice, there's no real long-term thinking, just because it's so difficult to understand what's happening now. That's a little aside that got me. And by the way, you should stop me if I say something that you don't quite understand, because it's possible. Anyway, moving on. The effect. So with everything else that I say, just bear in mind that it's a constant struggle between there's no kind of perfect right state for the Venice Lagoon. There's no ideal set of activities for what should happen in Venice. It's just a question of policymakers, and with the help of the residents of Venice, and the residents of Venice are no longer just the Venetians, but it's also the huge international community that come and go here, and Venice as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, etc. It's a question of deciding what they want. My husband says if they can put man on the moon, which not everybody's sure that they did, if they can put a man on the moon, they can fix Venice. What you're going to hear in the rest of the talk is about all the things that need to be fixed, so to speak. First of all, the jetties at the inlet. The picture on the left shows you how the sediment exchange at the inlets with the incoming and outgoing tides before they built the jetties. The diagram on the right shows you the sediment transport now that they have the jetties. And you see the asymmetry, because the red and yellow colors is actually the concentration of sand and mud particles in the water. And you see that the top one shows a little bit coming in with the incoming tide. The bottom one shows that because of the concentration of the current in the narrow, long inlet, the much larger amounts of sediments get kind of sucked out, dragged out of the lagoon. And so over time, since they built the jetties in the between the end of the 19th and very early 20th century, there's been this continuous net loss of sediments from the lagoon every year. Well, every tidal cycle, in fact, twice a day, day in, day out. So this is a little zoom into what this has done in the central lagoon, and comparing 1901 on the left to 2003, you see the average depth has increased by a meter, and all the kind of lagoon morphology. I don't know if I'm allowed to use the word morphology in a room full of art historians, but it's like the shape and nature of the substructures made out of mud and plants and water within the lagoon has all broken down, and from being a very kind of complicated set of habitats and interrelationships between the channels, the smaller, tidal creeks and marshes, etc. It's just what I call a kind of underwater desert now. And not only is that important from the point of view of the loss of biodiversity and habitats for the lagoon, but it also has important consequences for future water levels in the city. And this is just two old photographs saying the same thing, but I thought you'd like to see it in the real form. And this is what you see when you're standing right next to it, is the edges of the salt marshes that naturally would be gradual, slanting surfaces going from the upper areas of the salt marsh into the water become eroded as the water gets deeper, and the wave energy is proportional to the depth of the water underneath it. So it's like a vicious circle. As there's more erosion, the water gets deeper. When the wind blows, the waves are stronger and there's more erosion taking away the bits and pieces of the salt marsh. Here it is in close-up. And this is some very interesting work done by Professor Dal Paus at the University of Padua, where he took I showed you some historic maps. He got hold of many more, and he geo-referenced them to, the elements that still exist in the lagoon today, and he managed to make an estimate of the rate of erosion in the lagoon from the end of the 17th century to now, because the way they drew those maps, he says some of those maps were drawn even more accurately than these kind of computer-generated things that we do today. It's not just because you measure it by satellite that it's more accurate. There's a lot of interpretation and analysis that needs to go into that, and there's even error in the readings. If it's foggy or if there's wind waves. The satellite readings need to compensate for that, and nothing. So I'm all for the mixing together of information, taking different sources. Of course, the advances in technology are important, but one mustn't forget the kind of ancient sources of knowledge and the real knowledge that the fishermen have, for example.